The cathedral was drowning in silence. The air was thick with the sweet, heavy scent of lilies, the kind of fragrance that clings to memory long after the flowers are gone. A faint draft slipped through the tall stained glass windows, carrying with it the low hum of the choir's hymn. Their voices floated softly delicate and fragile like threads of sorrow hanging in the air. Every note echoed against the marble walls, rippling through the vast chamber. But instead of comfort, the sound left behind a strange hollowness. It wasn't grief that filled this place. It was pretend grief. Karen Ellis sat quietly in the very last row, her back pressed against the polished oak pew, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. She forced her breath to steady, but every inhale felt heavier than the last. Her eyes moved across the rows ahead, scanning the polished sea of black suits and somber faces, stopping finally at the front where the board of directors sat like an immovable wall of power. Their designer ties were perfectly knotted. Their cufflinks gleamed beneath the soft light. Their expressions were solemn, respectful, almost angelic. But Karen knew better. She had sat across from these same men for years. She had seen their smirks behind closed doors, heard their whispers when they thought she wasn't listening. And she knew none of them were here for David Holloway. To them, this wasn't a tragedy. It was an opportunity. She shifted slightly on the wooden bench, the sound barely audible beneath the distant hymn. Her gaze locked onto Bryce Matthews, one of the most ambitious members of the board. Even now, sitting in the front row, his fingers tapped idly against his knee, impatient, restless, calculating. For Bryce David's, death wasn't the end of an era. It was his chance to rise. Karen's stomach turned and she lowered her gaze, letting the golden patterns from the stained glass windows distract her. Rays of light cut through the solemn shadows, scattering fragments of red and blue across the marble floor, painting the room with a beauty that felt almost cruel against the weight of loss. For a fleeting moment, Karen closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, letting the hymn wash over her. But instead of comfort, the ache in her chest grew sharper. She felt as though the silence carried David's absence like a ghost pressing against her ribs. David Holloway. To the world, he had been the CEO, powerful, untouchable, a titan of the industry. But to Karen, he had been something else entirely. A mentor, a protector, the one person in the company who looked past her title, her gender, her quietness, and saw her. She remembered the late nights working on Strategy David, staying long after everyone else had gone, sipping his black coffee while listening carefully to every idea she laid on the table. He believed in her when no one else did, and in return she gave him her loyalty, unquestioned, unwavering, absolute. And now the man who had fought for her, the man who had seen her worth when others tried to erase it, was gone. Her throat tightened as she blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall here in front of them. Not here, not in front of them. She straightened her shoulders, forcing calm over the storm inside. She had learned long ago that power wasn't loud. It didn't scream or weep for sympathy. Power waited, and so she sat there in silence, letting the board think she was defeated, letting them believe her grief would leave her fragile and broken. They had no idea what David had left behind. They had no idea that buried beneath her quiet mourning was a secret powerful enough to burn their entire empire to the ground. Karen's eyes drifted to the front of the cathedral where David's framed portrait rested on a pedestal of white roses. His calm smile stared back at her, steady and reassuring, the same smile he wore the very first day they met. Her chest tightened as memories came flooding back. She had started at the company nearly a decade ago, a young strategist with big ideas but little influence. Back then, the board barely acknowledged her existence. Her proposals were dismissed and her voice drowned in rooms dominated by louder older men. But David Holloway, he had noticed her. He was different. While others measured people by titles and connections, David looked for capability, clarity, and heart. And he found all three in Karen. She remembered one particular day years ago when she had spent weeks crafting a marketing proposal she truly believed in. During the meeting, she presented it passionately, but halfway through, Bryce had interrupted, speaking over her, twisting her idea into his own. The entire board applauded him. Karen had sat there, silent, humiliated, her hands trembling under the table. That afternoon, while she packed up her notes, David stopped by her office. "You handled yourself well in there," he said softly, leaning against the doorframe. "I didn't," Karen admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "They stole my idea and no one even noticed." David's smile was faint but warm. I noticed. And next time they will too. You have something they don't: patience. Strategy. Trust me, Karen, the loudest voices in the room rarely build the strongest empires. From that day forward, she trusted him completely. And over the years, he proved worthy of that trust. Whenever the politics turned vicious, David shielded her. Whenever Bryce tried to corner her, David pulled her out. He wasn't just her CEO, he was her ally, her mentor, the one man who stood between her and the wolves. But the memory that haunted her most was their last conversation. It had been just a week before his heart gave out. She still remembered the quiet of his office, the way the evening light filtered through the blinds, painting faint golden stripes across the polished oak desk. David looked different that day, tired, yes, but sharp, his focus unwavering. "Close the door, Karen," he'd said, his voice lower than usual. She obeyed, stepping inside, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. David reached into his drawer and slid a thick envelope across the desk. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes never wavered. "I trust you more than anyone here." He began, his tone calm but weighted. "When I'm gone, the board will try to destroy everything we've built. They'll fight, they'll manipulate, they'll gut this company for their own gain. That's why I'm giving you this." Karen hesitated, staring at the envelope as though it carried fire. Her fingers brushed against the seal before she dared to open it. Inside were documents, legal papers, thick and carefully notarized. And at the very top, her name. She blinked in disbelief. "David, what is this?" His lips curved into the faintest smile. 51% Karen, a controlling stake. You'll know when the time is right." Her throat tightened, tears threatening to rise, but David's steady gaze held her together. "Promise me one thing," he said softly, leaning forward, his voice nearly a whisper now. "Don't rush. Let them move first. Let them show their teeth, and when they do, you strike once and you strike final." Karen swallowed hard, nodding. She wanted to argue, to refuse, to insist there had to be another way, but the look in his eyes silenced her. That was the last time she ever saw him alive. And now, sitting in the cathedral surrounded by false mourners and whispered greed, she could still feel the weight of his trust burning like fire in her chest. They had no idea what David had done, and until the moment was right, she intended to keep it that way. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the papers. Karen's breath caught in her throat the moment her eyes landed on the top of the first page. There it was, her name typed in bold, printed beside David Holloway's signature, notarized and sealed with the company's crest. Her vision blurred for a second as the weight of the moment crashed down on her. This can't be real," she whispered, her voice barely audible. David leaned back slightly in his chair, watching her reaction with calm, steady eyes. Then his voice dropped to a quiet, deliberate whisper, the kind that carved itself into memory forever. "They will underestimate you, Karen, every single one of them. They'll laugh. They'll dismiss you. They'll make the mistake of believing you're powerless." He paused, his gaze unblinking, sharp as a blade. "Let them," he said softly, "let them show you exactly who they are. Let them reveal their greed, their arrogance, their weakness. And when they do, you strike. But you strike once and you strike final." The words sank deep into her bones like an oath she hadn't chosen but couldn't refuse. She clutched the documents against her chest as though holding onto the weight of an empire in her hands. Her fingers brushed the embossed seal, 51% controlling stake. More power than she had ever imagined. But this wasn't a gift she could celebrate. It was a burden, a responsibility, a secret heavy enough to change everything. That night, after leaving David's office, she drove home in silence. The city lights blurred outside her window, and her mind raced faster than the traffic beneath them. Fear mixed with gratitude, uncertainty tangled with determination. And now here she sat, back in the present, in the dimly lit cathedral, the weight of that secret pressing against her chest like a second heartbeat. Just a few rows ahead, the board members sat with their carefully curated grief, whispering among themselves, already calculating who would control the company next. They didn't know. They couldn't know. Not yet. Karen lowered her gaze, lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line. Not a flicker of emotion crossed her face, not a single hint betrayed the truth buried inside her. Because until the moment was right, no one could know that Karen Ellis owned the empire they were fighting to control. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Karen stepped out onto the executive floor. Her heels clicked softly against the polished marble, each step steady, deliberate. Outside the boardroom, muffled voices leaked through the heavy oak doors, low, controlled tones laced with impatience and triumph. She paused for a brief second, drawing in a deep, controlled breath. Her heart was pounding, but her face calm, unreadable, perfectly composed. When she finally pushed open the door, the room fell silent for half a heartbeat. The boardroom was exactly as she remembered it. Sleek mahogany table leather-backed chairs, the skyline glittering faintly beyond the wall of glass. Every detail screamed power, and today that power was aimed squarely at her. 11 men and 2 women sat in perfect formation around the table, their tailored suits sharp, their expressions carefully neutral. But Karen could feel it, the tension in the air, the undercurrent of anticipation. At the far end of the table sat Charles Whitmore, the chairman, his silver cufflinks catching the morning light. He folded his hands, leaning back in his chair like a man about to deliver a verdict. "Karen," he said finally, his tone smooth but detached, almost surgical. "We've reviewed the company's current situation, and after much deliberation," he paused, letting the silence stretch. Every pair of eyes around the table shifted toward her, waiting, watching. "The board has decided to terminate your position," Charles said at last, his voice flat, stripped of any warmth or hesitation. "Effective immediately." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended above her head. Karen felt the weight of the moment, but she didn't flinch. Not even a twitch. Her hands rested lightly against the leather chair in front of her, her gaze steady and cool. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught Bryce Matthews smirking, the same smug, practiced curl of his lips she'd come to know far too well. His voice dripped with mock sympathy. "Tough break, Karen. Guess we'll all have to carry on without you." Several members exchanged faint smiles like predators, watching a wounded animal finally collapse. They thought this was victory. They thought they had broken her. But inside, Karen's calm was unshakable, because she knew something they didn't, something none of them could possibly imagine. As Charles shuffled his papers and prepared to move on, Karen's gaze drifted across the polished table, lingering just long enough for Bryce to catch it. She gave him nothing, no anger, no sadness, no plea for mercy, only silence. And in that silence, there was power. A low chuckle broke the silence. Karen turned her head slightly and found Bryce Matthews leaning back in his chair. His lips curved into that same smug, calculated smile she'd grown to despise. "Well," he began, casually twirling a pen between his fingers, like a man savoring victory. "I guess you'll need all the luck you can get, Karen. Finding a new job at your age, that's going to be tough." His words dripped with mock sympathy, but his eyes gleamed with satisfaction, the kind of satisfaction only someone who thinks they've already won can wear. Karen didn't respond. She didn't give him the satisfaction of anger or humiliation. Instead, she calmly adjusted the papers in front of her, her silence louder than any rebuttal could ever be. Bryce tilted his head, pretending to sigh. "Don't take it personally. It's just business, you know. The company needs strong leadership people who can make bold decisions. We can't afford deadweight." The words deadweight sliced through the room like a blade. Several board members exchanged faint smiles, some even letting out quiet, stifled laughs. It wasn't just Bryce. They were all complicit. To them, this wasn't just removing Karen. This was a political victory. Across the table, Marlene Hughes, another board member, leaned forward, tapping her manicured nails on the polished surface. Her voice was sweet but sharp as glass. "I'm sure you'll land on your feet, Karen. You're resourceful. Maybe a smaller company would appreciate your talents more." The laughter this time was louder, bolder. Karen sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable, letting their words wash over her like cold rain. Inside her chest burned not with shame, but with resolve. Every insult, every smirk, every condescending glance only sharpened her focus. She was holding something they didn't know, something that would shatter every assumption in this room. But not yet. Instead, she let them believe this was the end. She let them celebrate their supposed victory, their whispers of power, their empty triumphs. Because when the moment came, they wouldn't just lose control of the company, they'd lose everything. The room waited for her reaction. For a long, heavy moment, Karen simply stood there, her hands resting lightly against the leather chair, her gaze steady, unreadable. Every pair of eyes around the table was fixed on her, expecting anger, denial, or maybe even begging. But she gave them none of it. Instead, Karen took a slow, measured breath and let the tension break not with words, but with a smile. A small one, quiet, controlled. The kind of smile that made people uncomfortable without knowing why. She nodded once, graceful and deliberate, and said softly, "I understand." Then she gathered her papers, slid them neatly into her briefcase, and pushed back her chair with careful precision. The quiet scrape of metal against marble echoed through the rooms louder than any protest could have. Bryce leaned back, his smirk widening, convinced her composure was defeat. Charles scribbled something on his notes, already dismissing her from his world. They thought she was broken. They thought she was leaving in shame. They thought this was the end of her story. But Karen knew better, because beneath the calm surface, she carried a weapon. None of them could see, a secret sign sealed and locked away 51% of the company. A stake so powerful it could turn every smirk into silence, every ounce of arrogance into fear. Not today. Not yet. She walked toward the door slowly, heels clicking softly against the marble. Every step deliberate, like a countdown they couldn't hear. At the threshold, she paused for just half a second, enough to feel their eyes on her back. And though she didn't turn around, her lips curved again into that faint, quiet smile. The kind of smile that whispered, "Enjoy this while you can." Then Karen left the room without a single word. Her silence was deafening, and in that silence lay her power. The city was quiet when Karen stepped out of the taxi, the faint hum of streetlights blending with the distant sound of traffic far below. By the time she reached her apartment, night had fully swallowed the skyline, wrapping the world in shadows. She locked the door behind her and leaned against it for a brief moment, letting the silence wash over her. No boardroom whispers. No fake smiles. No more Bryce Matthews and his smug arrogance. Just her and the storm inside her chest. Karen set her leather briefcase on the dining table, her fingers brushing over the polished surface before she finally opened it. Inside, the papers rested exactly where she had placed them earlier, the documents David had given her. She pulled them out carefully, almost reverently, as though holding something sacred. The papers felt heavier tonight, or maybe it was the weight of what they represented. She laid them flat on the table and unfolded the top page. Her eyes moved slowly, tracing every line until they landed on the words that still felt surreal. Transfer of ownership, 51% controlling stake. Her breath caught. Even after all these days, it still didn't feel real. 51%, more than half of the empire. Enough power to rewrite the company's destiny. Enough power to end every single person who had mocked her today. But David's voice echoed in her memory, soft, calm, unshakable, the last thread of his presence she had left. "Don't rush, Karen. Let them move first. Let them show their greed, their arrogance. And when they do, you strike once, you strike final." She closed her eyes for a moment, gripping the edge of the table as those words sank deeper into her bones. The instinct inside her wanted to march back to that boardroom tomorrow and burn their entire fate to the ground. But David had prepared her for this moment. Patience wasn't weakness. Patience was strategy. Patience was power. She inhaled slowly, forcing the anger down, letting the plan take root instead. The soft ticking of the wall clock filled the silence around her, steady and relentless, like a countdown only she could hear. Tomorrow they would laugh again. Tomorrow they would celebrate, believing they had won. And tomorrow Karen would let them. Because when the time came, their laughter would turn to silence. The next morning, the city was still wrapped in mist when Karen drove across town to a quiet glass building tucked between rows of towering offices. There was no company logo, no receptionist greeting her loudly. Just a discreet brass plaque on the door, Chen & Associates, corporate law specialists. Inside, the office was minimalistic but sharp, all clean lines, black leather, and glass walls. At the far end, a woman stood by the window, her silhouette sharp against the pale morning light. Emily Chen. She was one of the most respected corporate attorneys in the state, a strategist known for dismantling entire boards of directors without ever raising her voice. Karen shook Emily's hand firmly, trying to mask the tremor of anticipation in her chest. "David trusted you," Karen began quietly. "He said if anything happened, you'd know what to do." Emily motioned for her to sit, her expression calm but focused. "David mentioned you once," Emily replied, her voice low but steady. "He believed in you, Karen, more than anyone else at Holloway Enterprises." Karen placed the documents on the table, the 51% controlling stake. Emily scanned them carefully, then leaned back in her chair, her dark eyes sharp with calculation. "You realize," Emily said slowly, "this changes everything, but it also paints a target on your back." Karen nodded. I know. Emily steepled her fingers, leaning forward. Then here's the plan, she said, her tone crisp, deliberate. Step 1. We gather evidence, emails, board memos, anything that proves they're mismanaging the company. Step 2. We map out the power players, their alliances, and their weaknesses. Step 3. Emily paused, locking eyes with Karen. We wait. We let them bury themselves deeper before we strike. Karen swallowed, absorbing every word, and Emily's voice softened slightly, but there was steel beneath it. They will attack you. They'll come after your credibility, your past, even your personal life. But if you're patient, if you move when the timing is right, Emily leaned closer, her voice a whisper now. You will win. For the first time in days, Karen allowed herself a small, quiet smile. The game had officially begun. The champagne flowed like victory itself. Inside a private rooftop lounge overlooking the city skyline, the board members of Holloway Enterprises were laughing, drinking, and congratulating one another. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter echoed off the glass walls, and at the center of it all was Bryce Donovan, the most ambitious and most ruthless member of the board. He raised his glass high, his grin sharp and triumphant. To new beginnings, Bryce declared loudly, his voice cutting through the music. No more David, no more Karen. The company's finally ours. A ripple of cheers erupted around the room. They were drunk on arrogance, drunk on the illusion of control. But somewhere across town, Karen Ellis sat in the shadows of her small apartment, her desk lit only by the glow of a single lamp. The signed documents, 51% ownership, rested neatly before her. And next to them lay Emily Chen's legal strategy, precise and deadly. As Karen flipped through the pages, a quiet determination settled over her. They think they've won, Emily's voice echoed in her memory from their earlier meeting. But every celebration they have, every move they make, leaves a trail. Karen's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, cold, controlled, calculated. Because what the board didn't know was that their celebration was actually the countdown to their downfall. Every toast, every cheer, every careless word spoken over champagne, all of it was leading them deeper into Karen's trap. Karen didn't go home that night. Instead, she drove across town to a quiet, nondescript building on the edge of the financial district. From the outside, it looked abandoned, peeling paint, dim lights, no signs of life. But inside, this would become the war room. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the small rented office. A single desk sat at the center, covered in stacks of documents, folders, and flash drives. Every sheet of paper carried evidence, secret financial reports, insider emails, records of unethical deals, all pointing to the corruption of the board. Karen placed her leather briefcase on the desk, opened it, and carefully slid out David Holloway's final gift, the 51% ownership transfer. She placed it in the middle of the table, her fingertips lingering on the embossed seal. This was her weapon. She stood by the window for a moment, staring at the city lights below her, reflection blending with the skyline. Her heart raced, but her expression stayed calm, calculating, unshaken. Suddenly, the door opened. Emily Chen walked in holding a laptop under her arm, her face sharp with focus. This is it, Emily said, setting the laptop down and pulling up multiple tabs of legal documents. This is where we start turning the tide. Karen nodded slowly, her voice steady, but laced with quiet fire. They wanted war. We'll give them one. Emily tapped the desk, outlining the next steps. Gather every shred of evidence against the board. Track their financial manipulations and political deals. Prepare a full corporate restructuring plan that would corner them publicly. Karen pulled out a black binder labeled Phase 1 and opened it. Inside was a detailed strategy, step by step, for dismantling the very power structure the board thought was untouchable. The office was silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. This wasn't just preparation. This was war in slow motion. The next morning, Karen walked into Anderson Holdings, the single largest investor in the company and the kingmaker in this corporate war. The reception area gleamed with glass and marble, its quiet elegance hiding the tension in Karen's chest. She wasn't here to ask for help. She was here to make a deal that would decide the future. Inside the boardroom, Victoria Hale, the CEO of Anderson Holdings, sat at the head of a long oak table. Sharp, poised, and intimidating, Victoria was known for one thing: she never backed a losing side. Karen laid down a black binder on the table and spoke calmly. Victoria, I know what the board has been hiding, and I know how to save this company in 90 days. Victoria raised an eyebrow, intrigued but skeptical. That's a bold claim, Karen. Show me. Karen flipped open the binder revealing detailed spreadsheets, cash flow projections, and a 90-day recovery plan. David had once hinted at a plan she had now perfected. Cut operational costs by 25% without layoffs. Secure 3 key strategic clients that the board was about to lose. Appoint a temporary COO with a proven turnaround record to stabilize operations. Karen's voice never wavered. Every number, every strategy, every forecast was backed by hard evidence and insider data the board didn't think she had. Victoria leaned back, crossing her arms, studying Karen carefully. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of a wall clock. Then finally, Victoria smiled faintly, a rare sign of approval. "You've done your homework," Victoria said, her tone measured but decisive. "You're offering me stability and leverage. The board underestimates you, Karen." "That's a mistake." Karen nodded slowly, locking eyes with her. "I don't just want your investment, Victoria. I want your backing when I make my move." After a long pause, Victoria closed the binder and extended her hand. "You have Anderson Holdings on your side." For the first time in weeks, Karen allowed herself the smallest smile. The war wasn't over, but now she had an army behind her. Karen stepped out of Anderson Holdings' glass tower, the afternoon sun spilling across the city streets. For the first time in weeks, the weight pressing on her chest felt lighter. She had done it. Victoria Hale and Anderson Holdings were officially on her side. She now had capital influence and the backing of the most powerful investor in the company. But even as relief washed over her, a deeper, colder realization followed. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of war. Karen stopped on the sidewalk, clutching her bag tightly, her thoughts racing. Emily Chen's voice echoed in her head from their late-night strategy session. Karen securing allies is step 1. Step 2 is surviving the legal firestorm they're about to unleash. Because Karen knew exactly what the board would do next. They wouldn't back down quietly. They would attack her harder, dirtier, and louder than ever. Accusations, lawsuits, media leaks, smear campaigns. The board would throw everything at her to strip her of power. Karen closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. Then she whispered to herself, "David, I won't let them destroy your legacy. Not without a fight." The city around her moved as if nothing had changed, but deep inside she felt the tremor of something massive approaching. The storm was coming, and this time Karen wasn't just surviving it. She was going to command it. The boardroom was buzzing with quiet chatter as the members prepared for the next agenda item. The polished mahogany table gleamed under the warm lights, and the city skyline stretched behind the glass walls, a perfect image of power. And then the doors opened. Karen Ellis stepped inside, calm, poised, unshaken. For a moment, silence swallowed the entire room. Every pair of eyes turned toward her, confused, unsettled, and afraid. Then a mocking laugh sliced through the tension. It was Bryce Donovan, the most ambitious and ruthless voice on the board. "What the hell are you doing here, Karen? Didn't we fire you? Or did you come back to beg?" Karen didn't flinch. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked slowly, deliberately until she reached the head of the table. Without a single word, she placed a thick stack of legal documents on the polished wood. The sound echoed like a thunderclap. Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight that crushed the air in the room. "You didn't fire me, Bryce." She locked eyes with him. "You work for me now." And then silence. A deadly, suffocating silence. The silence was deafening. All eyes locked on the stack of legal documents resting on the table. David Holloway's signed transfer of power. The chairman, Richard Cole, slowly reached out with trembling hands. He flipped through the pages, line by line, signature by signature, and then his face went pale. The color drained from his cheeks as reality hit him like a bullet. This can't be real," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Is this even legal?" Murmurs rippled across the room. Some members leaned closer, their breaths uneven. Others clenched their fists under the table, realizing everything had changed in an instant. Karen stood tall, her hands resting calmly on the polished wood. Her voice was steady, almost cold, but it carried the weight of 1,000 storms. "Every signature, every seal, every document has been verified by the state." She paused, letting the words sink in. Then, locking eyes with each of them, she delivered the final blow. "From this moment on, I control this company." A pin-drop silence consumed the room. And for the first time, Karen Ellis wasn't the one standing on trial. She was the judge. Bryce's face turned crimson, his jaw tightening like a coiled spring. And then, bang, his palm slammed against the polished oak table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "This is ridiculous," he roared, his voice shaking with rage. "There's no way David would ever give you control. This is a setup." But Karen didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed locked on him, unblinking calm in the middle of the storm. The chairman, Richard, leaned back heavily, his face pale and drained of all color. He knew it was over, but Bryce refused to accept defeat. "Another board member?" Clara whispered sharply, "Check the documents. There has to be a loophole." Emily Chen, Karen's attorney, stepped forward and placed a thick envelope on the table. Inside, certified signatures, notarized seals, and a full chain of legal records. These papers, Emily said firmly, were verified by the state registrar, the corporate court, and David Holloway's personal attorney. Every page is authentic. The silence was crushing. Bryce's lips trembled, his anger choking him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. In that single moment, the balance of power shattered. The old hierarchy was dead. For the first time in the company's history, the board was powerless, and Karen Ellis stood at the top. The board wasn't done. Humiliated, cornered, and furious, they launched a full-scale legal attack against Karen Ellis. Bryce, now leading the charge, stepped in front of the cameras outside the courthouse. His voice dripped with venom as he declared David Holloway was not of sound mind when he signed those papers. This entire transfer of power is invalid. Within hours, Karen's world became a battlefield. Headlines exploded across every business network. Power struggle at Holloway Corp. CEOs will challenged, 51% control under fire. Karen Ellis faces legal showdown, but Karen was ready. Inside her private war room, Emily Chen spread out medical records, doctor testimonies, and legal documents across the table. "They want a war," Emily said, her voice razor sharp. "Then we give them one." Karen's heart pounded as she stared at David's last signed statement, a video testimony recorded just days before his death. On the screen, David's voice was steady, his eyes clear, his words sharp. "I, David Holloway, in full mental capacity, hereby transfer 51% of Holloway Corp. To Karen Ellis." When the clip ended, silence filled the room. That recording was a bombshell. It wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was David himself defending Karen from beyond the grave. Emily leaned back, a confident smile forming on her face. Bryce just lost his biggest argument, and he doesn't even know it yet. The real war had just begun. The tide was turning. 2 days after the board's lawsuit went public, a shocking press release hit the wires. Anderson Holdings announces full support for Karen Ellis. The statement came directly from Victoria Hale, the powerful CEO of Anderson Holloway Corp.'s largest institutional investor. Standing before a wall of cameras, Victoria's words cut through the noise. "Anderson Holdings firmly believes in Karen Ellis' leadership. We will stand by her as she protects David Holloway's vision and fights for the future of this company." The impact was immediate. Stock prices stabilized overnight. Investor confidence surged. Behind closed doors, chaos erupted within the boardroom. Bryce slammed his fist on the table, veins bulging on his neck. "This changes nothing," he barked, but the panic in his voice betrayed him. But it did change everything, because Anderson wasn't the only one. Within 48 hours, 3 more institutional investors, including Vanguard Equity, Bridgeview Capital, and Lansing Partners, issued statements publicly backing Karen. One by one, the dominoes fell. Emily Chen studied the numbers on her laptop, a faint smile forming. "They're bleeding influence," she whispered. "By the time the trial starts, Bryce won't have the votes to survive." For the first time since David's death, Karen felt the weight lifting off her chest. She wasn't just fighting alone anymore. She was leading an army. In the board, they didn't even realize the war had already tipped in Karen's favor. The courtroom fell silent. No one dared to breathe as the judge adjusted his glasses and unfolded the final ruling. After reviewing all evidence, this court finds a transfer of 51% shares to Karen Ellis legal and binding. Effective immediately, Karen Ellis is the controlling shareholder of Holloway Corp. The gavel struck. Bang! The sound echoed like a thunderclap across the room. Bryce's face went pale, his jaw locked, tight fists trembling beneath the table. Emily leaned over and whispered softly to Karen, "It's over." We won, but Karen didn't smile. Her victory wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring David's legacy. 2 days later, the employees of Holloway Corp filled the lobby, murmuring in anticipation. The glass doors slid open and Karen walked in. No longer the quiet, underestimated woman everyone once ignored, she was now the undisputed force of power. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, sharp and deliberate each step, commanding respect. Every pair of eyes followed her. Whispers spread like wildfire, that's her, the new owner. She controls everything now. Karen stepped into the executive boardroom, the same room where she was humiliated and discarded weeks ago. But this time, every chair turned toward her. Every voice fell silent. She placed the court ruling on the table, her voice steady, calm, and absolute. This company belongs to David Holloway's vision, and starting today, I intend to protect it. In that single moment, the power shifted forever. The woman they tried to bury now owned the ground beneath their feet. The executive boardroom was silent. No one moved. The tension was so thick you could feel the weight of every breath. Karen stood at the head of the table, the court ruling in one hand and the termination documents in the other. Her voice was calm, too calm. This company belongs to David Holloway's vision, and for those who tried to destroy it, your time is over. She placed the papers on the table and looked directly at Bryce. Bryce smirked, still clinging to his arrogance. You think you can run this company without us? You're nothing without this board. Karen's gaze didn't waver. Her voice dropped cold and sharp. No, Bryce, you're nothing without this company. And as of this moment, you're finished. She signed the termination notice with one deliberate stroke and slid it across the table. Security stepped forward. Bryce Thompson, your employment is terminated. Please leave the building immediately. For the first time, Bryce's confidence cracked. His face burned red with anger, but he had no words left. The man who once controlled everything was now powerless. As Bryce stormed out, the entire boardroom watched in stunned silence. And then it happened. One by one, employees rose to their feet. First a soft clap, then another, until the entire office erupted into thunderous applause. Tears welled in Karen's eyes, but she stood tall, shoulders squared, unshaken. This wasn't just revenge, this was justice. She turned toward the team and spoke with quiet strength. We are rebuilding Holloway Corp. Not with fear, not with greed, but with integrity the way David intended. And in that moment, Karen Ellis wasn't just the woman they underestimated. She became the leader they would follow. The office was quiet after the storm. The cheers, the chaos, the confrontation it had all faded into silence. Karen sat alone in the CEO's office, David Holloway's old office, where the walls still breathed his vision. On the desk in front of her lay a single framed photo of David, smiling confident, full of life. She picked it up with trembling hands, her voice breaking into a whisper. I promise you, David, I will protect what you built. I'll keep your dream alive. Tears gathered in her eyes, but there was strength in her heart. This wasn't just about winning a war anymore. It wasn't about revenge. It was about honoring the man who believed in her when no one else did. Karen thought back to the first day she met David, the only executive who saw her potential, who shielded her from office politics, who reminded her to play the long game. And now here she was, holding the empire he entrusted her with. For a moment, Karen closed her eyes and imagined David's voice again. Led with integrity, Karen. Not with fear, not with power, but with vision. She smiled softly through her tears. Karen Ellis was no longer just an underestimated employee. She was the guardian of David's dream. And from this moment forward, every decision she made would be to protect his legacy. In the end, Karen's story wasn't just about corporate wars, boardroom betrayals, or even the downfall of Bryce. It was about something deeper, something timeless. Because sometimes true power doesn't come from the one who shouts the loudest. It comes from the one who waits, the one who listens, the one who knows that silence can be sharper than a sword if you wield it with patience. Karen didn't win by screaming. She didn't win by seeking revenge. She won by staying calm, by waiting for the right moment, by trusting that truth and time would expose her enemies for what they really were. And when the time finally came, she didn't just reclaim control of the company. She reclaimed her voice, her worth, her destiny. So if there's one lesson to take away from Karen Ellis' story, it's this: real strength isn't about being loud. It's about being steady. And when you strike, you make it final. In life, we often believe that power comes from speaking the loudest or fighting back right away. But Karen Ellis' story teaches us something different. True strength comes from patience, calm, and knowing the right moment to act. You don't always need to shout to be heard. Sometimes silence carries the sharpest edge, and when the time is right, one decisive move can change everything. The lesson for us all, whether in work, family, or relationships: learn to control your emotions, stay patient, and stand in integrity. In the end, truth and time will always reveal who really holds the power. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like and share this video so others can draw strength from it too. And don't forget to subscribe to Athena Stories, where every story not only moves you, but also leaves behind a powerful lesson for your own life. Stay with us because one story can change everything.